Okay. Welcome everybody to I believe it's our 6th lead night. Fantastic to see you all here tonight. Tonight is going to be fantastic. We've got Dave Mitchie in the house, and Dave's going to be introduced more formally a little bit later, but where is Dave? Dave, thanks so much, mate, for being here, and really appreciate you investing in us as leaders and speaking on a really important topic tonight. So thanks, Dave. But I want to just before I hand over to Josh. Josh is also our intern is going to come up you're up next. Sorry, Grace. Grace is up next, and then Josh. But I want to have a bit of an idea of who's in the room. So can I just get a bit of you guys, right? Look at these guys. Home City Church, is that right? Home City Church, welcome. Good to have you guys with us. So, and just, that was like a lightsaber. Did you notice these guys are leading the way and sitting out the front? And so just wanted to make mention of that to all of our South Perth people. But do we have any people from Livestream South Perth here tonight? We've got a few people. What about Livestreams Bull Creek? Woo! Karawara? Fantastic. Hope Church? Fantastic. Now, you guys, I get the CCFC something. CCF, Care Christian Fellowship, is that right? Yep, so can we put our hands together for our CCF? We got Livestream Sterling. And have I missed anybody? Have we got any special guests here tonight? I think we've got some people from Riverview, is that right? So really good to have you guys. And yeah, give them a hand. And Pete, did you? True North. Fantastic to have you. Really good. So welcome everybody. I also want to say a huge welcome to everybody who's watching online. So we've got our Livestreams Global family tuning in tonight live, and we're expecting people to be watching from Myanmar, from the Philippines, from Nepal, and maybe a few other places, Indonesia. So guys, I want to say a huge welcome to you for tuning in. And can we give all of our people who are watching online, and they might not even be watching this online, like we put this on in our YouTube channel for other leaders to watch as they're able to. So let's welcome them as well. All the people that are going to be watching later. Now, again, thanks so much for being here tonight. It's going to be a fantastic night. You're going to learn heaps, and I'm going to pass over to Grace. So thanks, Grace.
Thanks, Rod. I just wanted to welcome you all myself, but I also wanted to let you know a little bit more about what we do and why we do lead nights. So our lead nights are a part of our lead community, which it has the heart to equip leaders for wherever you're placed. So it may be in your work life, in your ministry life, your family, wherever that is. And so we're just excited that you're in the room and that you want to equip yourself more in your leadership journey. For those who are streaming online, there is a link in the description that will just give you a link to the PowerPoint for tonight, but also for some of the resources that are on the tables. So you can click that if you're streaming online. But if you are in the room, there's a little booklet on the tables, and David will refer to that later, but on the back is a QR code, so you can find that digitally as well, and you can scan that. So I just wanted to let you know about that. I guess another aspect of our lead stream is our lead internship. So that is where we have like a 1 day a week internship that aims to equip people in their leadership. And this year we have Josh Riches, who is an intern. And he has just been growing, and it's been so awesome to see so much of what God has been doing in his life. And so he's going to share a little bit of an encouragement with us tonight before we get into the rest of the night. So I'm going to welcome Josh up.
Thank you, Grace. So as Grace said, I'm the intern here, or one of the interns. I shouldn't say the only. There is another intern here. I thought I'd start with just a bit about me. So I am a high school teacher, majoring in PE and then home economics. So a bit of cooking, a bit of sewing. This year's been a bit of an interesting one for me because I hadn't actually planned on doing the internship. I got a job offer up in the Northern Territory, full-time job, and so I spent a lot of time praying, fasting on that, and I probably made the mistake of telling too many people about it because there were a lot of opinions thrown in there, but at the end of the day, I chose to stay here, and then that opened the door to come and do the internship, which is, I don't know, I've really enjoyed it. I didn't know what to expect from it. I think I probably more went in there wanting to know a bit more about how the church operates other than on a Sunday, which is often all we get to see. So one of the things that has really stood out to me, and something that I've been growing in since I became a youth leader, is this topic of having a kingdom mindset or thinking big picture in the way we do, well, for me, youth ministry. And it's not an easy concept to wrap your head around or to kind of go along with. And so for a couple of years, you know, we'd have youth and then we'd debrief at the end of a Friday night. And there was always this talk of, we've got to have a kingdom mindset, think big picture. And I'm sitting there like, okay, that's all well and good, but there's small little things that are going on in our youth ministry that I'm like, if we just tweak it a little bit, it'll be really good. And I distinctly remember one Friday night, it was let's say a challenging night, and I remember during debrief, I don't think there was many positives that were going around the table. And I included my own negative in there. And it wasn't until the oldest serving youth leader, Phil, piped up and said, these words I'll never forget them, but he just said, after we'd all given our little spiel about how negative the night was, he just said, "That's youth group." And although two very simple words, that's kind of stuck with me for since then. I can't remember if it was at the beginning of the year or end of last year, but those two words have kind of shifted how I look at youth group, how I look at our nights, the way they're run, whether it's positive or negative nights. I generally try not to let the little things bother me anymore. One of the big things about having a kingdom mindset is, will it affect someone's salvation? And oftentimes the little things are not going to affect that. So whether it's, you know, kids keep running around out of bounds or they're on their phone, these are things that are annoying, but they're part of youth group. And I don't think, well, I've learned that it actually doesn't matter that much. As youth leaders, we're called to serve and to build relationships with our kids. And I think that has a bigger impact in their salvation, whether we see it or it happens in 10 odd years. So I guess my encouragement out of that space, and probably it's a challenge because there are still times at youth group where it's a rough night. But I know for myself, I try and I guess take any positive that I can. Whether it seems insignificant, you know, we have one of our youth boys, he's a bit of a rat bag and causes us some headaches sometimes, but on Friday night, he's usually a bit opposed to standing in the worship space and kind of engaging with it. And although he didn't sing the songs, he stood up the front and did not leave for the entire worship set. So in my mind, I go, you can look at that as, oh, he didn't really engage in the worship, or you can go, he's actually staying around and not just leaving or going and mucking around with other kids. So that was a massive win in my eyes. So I guess my encouragement is to continue having a kingdom perspective, because I think it matters in the long run if we think big picture rather than what's right in front of us and an immediate issue. So, thank you.
Thanks, Josh. I know that it has been such an encouragement for me to see the way Josh has grown over this last little while, and just see the way he's thinking big picture and he's investing in, it's the long game ministry, and it's not about the one night, it's about what we're doing for eternity's sake. So it's just encouraging to see that, and I hope that you can find some parallels through what Josh has shared in his story tonight in your own ministry lives or in your own workplaces, whatever that might be. I hope that you can gain something out of that. It's my absolute pleasure now to introduce David Mitchie to all of you. He is an incredibly equipped man to come and speak to us today. Not only is he a husband, a parent of 5 children, he has been a social worker. He's 38 years of social work, counselling, community work, training, teaching and supervision experience. He's the director of Journey Lines Counselling and Training Services, the program manager of Ebenezer Aboriginal Corporation, and a lecturer at Perth Bible College. He says he enjoys being married, being with his family, sitting with people, learning, and anything to do with being in or underwater. That's very exciting. It is just incredible to have him with us. So if you would give me a warm welcome as we welcome David up this morning.
Thank you. Evening. Thank you for coming out. You come out in the evening to be able to take time out to think about being people of influence, people who desire to influence the kingdom, so that you're willing to come along and learn a little bit about something which gets in the way of being an influencer, and that is stress. Most often it gets in the way of being an influencer, and the risk of burnout. And so it is important, I think, that if you are going to be an influencer for the kingdom, that you need to be people who address the issue of stress. Now, the risk is that what I communicate to you this evening, none of you will actually put into practice, because that's the nature of stress. Stress convinces you that nothing works, that stress is what you have to live with, and that it's actually perhaps even useful. So for you to take benefit from what we're going to be talking about this evening, it is going to be really important for you to actually take seriously what you're going to need to do to actually deal with and address stress and to prevent burnout. Now, we've got about 40 minutes of me presenting material to you. Each slide that I have, I think I've got about 11 or 12 I could take an hour on. And so one of the tricks of this will be to not speak this material in a way that's going to cause you stress, which is very easy to do by trying to cram in too much too soon. So one of the things that I have a great belief in is I am committed to not being busy. So if anybody ever asks me, are you busy? I will always say no. And usually what happens is people are puzzled. They go, what? Are you on holidays? I go, no. Oh, you've got the day off work then, have you? And I say, no. Oh, you haven't got much on then today? And I go, no. But you're not busy? And I go, no. Most people then don't know what to do with the conversation. It comes to a grinding halt, and I have to fill in the next bit. And I say this, I'm happy to be full. My days are most often full. But I am committed to not being busy. Busyness is something between my ears that I try my best to avoid. And if I can begin to hear it going, I actually need to slow down. And one of the things that we know is that by slowing down, you actually create more time for yourself. So even though I've got 12 slides that could take an hour each, I'm committed not to being busy, and I'm committed not to going fast. So I'll try and do this actually fairly slowly and see if there can still be enough in there that's of help to you. There is this particular idea, what I call the stress equation. And here's the basic equation for stress. That when demand is greater than resources, you will experience stress. That's the basic equation. That demand may be real or perceived. It may be internal demands that you may have of yourself, or external demands from outside sources. The resources may be real or perceived, and the resources may be internal capacities that you have or external resources that you need. And the basic idea of dealing with stress is that you either need to reduce the demand, either the real demand or the perceived demand, and or you need to increase resources, either the real or the perceived resources. So that's the basic stress equation. Now, a lot of this you're going to have to translate into your own circumstances, and you might need to think that through in terms of your own particular vocations, responsibilities and roles, that demand versus resources, and how our demands or my felt demand levels in relation to resource levels. There's also an equation for anxiety, and the anxiety equation goes like this. Anxiety is threat over capacity. And when you experience increased level of threat, what anxiety will do, it will trick you. Anxiety exaggerates the level of threat, and it then misjudges your capacity to be able to deal the situation by doing one of two things. Most typically, underestimating your capacity. So as anxiety increases, it exaggerates the level of threat, and it also exaggerates your incapacity. Now, there's another mistake that sometimes happens, and it's this one, sometimes by overestimating your capacity. So initially it's kind of like, oh, no threat here, I can deal with this, I've got all of what it takes to be able to address this, and you go at it, and it doesn't work. And then you crash. Most often, though, what anxiety does, it over-exaggerates the level of threat and underestimates your capacity to be able to deal with it. Stress and anxiety are related. Stress, anxiety, trauma are actually all related. They're kind of on a continuum. You don't want to be moving into the anxiety equation. If you're going to have a problem, just deal with stress. Okay, that's enough. But it's also important to be aware of anxiety, that it does limit us by underestimating our capacity to deal with things. There's also another couple of problems with stress. One of those is that it can become a habit. Now, the way that the chemicals affect our brain, there are two particular chemicals, cortisol, which is one of the chemicals which is primarily responsible for stress and anxiety, and also adrenaline. And what can happen is that we can become addicted to cortisol and to adrenaline. And so you can become addicted, or you can become dependent on stress. And so stressy people find life stressful. Now, stressy people always blame the circumstances, but we can become stressy simply because our brain gets wired to stress. And if you've seen those, they're not on the TV anymore, but there was a little while ago those nicotine ads where here's a brain that doesn't have nicotine in the system and it gets hungry for nicotine. Well, cortisol is similar to nicotine as a stimulant, and when your brain has got used to having cortisol and it doesn't have cortisol in the system, it gets hungry for cortisol. It gets stressed out by not having stress. And that's the typical loop of an addictive cycle. And so stress can become a habit. It's seldom, once it's become a habit, is it dealt with by simply changing the circumstances. That sometimes can be helpful. But if it's become a habit, you have to change the habit of stress. And that can be tricky, because it also, one of the things that stress does, very similar to anxiety, it signals to our brain that this is the best way of dealing with things. Now, most often it's actually not the best way of dealing with things. The other danger with stress is that we all like a little bit of drama. Doing things kind of smoothly and evenly and well without drama is just a little bit dull. And so we actually are people who get drawn to drama. If you just have a look at what's on TV, what we get drawn to on TV. So we do like a little bit of drama, and so being able to do things without drama, and we make a drama of even these kind of conversations. Now, I don't know any of you here, but we do this. Oh, how busy are you? Okay. Now, we don't even ask, oh, how busy are you? We ask, oh, how busy are you? We've already put the drama into it already. Oh, you're that busy, are you? Oh my goodness, how do you cope with being that busy? So we don't even have a normal conversation about busyness. We have a dramatic conversation about busyness. There are a number of myths attached to stress as well. Here's myth number 1. We perform better under stress. That is a myth. We only perform better under stress for short periods in some instances. That's true, but the idea that I work better under stress is actually not true. It's a myth. You won't be able to think as well, you won't be able to focus as well, you won't be able to attend to the things that you need to attend if you work under stress. Stress switches off the medium to longer term thinking part of your brain. It also switches off certain language parts of your brain. It changes your perception of things, becomes more self-focused, so you actually don't perform better under stress. So we only perform better under stress for short periods in some instances. Some of this material we actually learned from elite athletes. So even elite athletes who you might think that a good dose of stress before a 100-metre sprint is going to be really, really helpful, what you'll see before they have that particular race, they'll actually quite often be talking to themselves. And what they're actually doing is actually trying to actually settle themselves down. They've got enough adrenaline running through the system that to run tight, even in a sprint, is no good. And so they're actually trying to de-stress themselves. I'll just go back to one previous idea also about the habit. This is bad news for women. What we do know is that as a generalisation, a broad generalisation, women are more prone to get addicted to stress than men are. And that's more so because for most men, more adrenaline is attached to the cortisol. For most women, less adrenaline is attached to the cortisol. So adrenaline leads to action. It's a very broad generalisation. Men also can get addicted to stress, but women are more prone to getting addicted to stress. And there's some particular reasons as to why that's thought to be the case, which we don't have time to go into, but just be aware of that. So we perform best. So, and again, a lot of this research came working with elite athletes and it's been then translated into the vocational settings. We perform best when we operate at about 75 to 85% of our capacity at a regular, consistent, relaxed, focused manner. Now, those things are important. Some of you could actually go, oh, that's great. I went to this lecture. What's this? A workshop? And I heard this bloke say that I only have to work 75% of the time. And that's not quite what's being said here. We do work at our best when we operate at 75% to 85% of our capacity on a regular, consistent, rhythmic, relaxed, focused manner. And what's actually been shown is that work productivity actually increases when we actually work in that particular fashion. What's the other thing that's good about this? You actually can learn how to do this. So when I finished high school, I had an attention span of about 15 minutes. When I was in primary school, on what my teacher thought was bad days, she would tie me to the chair. And then on really bad days, she thought they were really bad days. I thought they were fine. I just thought she was a bit old, just needed to retire and didn't quite know how to deal with youthful exuberance. She would put tape over my mouth. Okay. Now, I thought that I'd matured beyond that in high school, and that I was actually pretty decent. But my mother kept all of my report cards for me, and at the age of 35, I don't know why at 35, she gave them all to me, and all the way through high school still. When he finally sits down, when he finally stops talking, when he finally stops moving around the class, when he finally pays attention, I went to university and I had a 15-minute attention span. I was 22 and I was doing a social work prac at Royal Perth Hospital, and my supervisor said, "Do you care about people?" And I said, "That's a really interesting question." Okay. Well, and then she said, "Well, would you like people to think that you care about them?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, that needs to stop." And I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Your hands never stop moving." And at that particular point, I had a pen in my hand, and I was just rolling the pen through, rolling the pen through. So if you'd met me at 18, so I can still do all these things. Okay, so the pace that I operate now, I've learnt. It's not how I was kind of my natural wiring when I was actually a younger person. So you can actually learn to actually operate in a regular, consistent, rhythmic, relaxed, focused manner. It may take some time, but you can get there. Now, where were we? So that's the stress myth number one. And more often, walking gets you further than running. Stress myth number two. Demand, this might confuse you in light of the first equation that we put up there, but demand in terms of workload is actually not the greatest stressor. The greatest stressor has been shown to be these two things. One is a lack of a sense of agency or ownership. That in my vocation or in my home or in my circumstances, I don't feel like I have control of what's going on. There's either somebody telling me what to do all the time, or somebody that's blocking my way, or somebody that's actually acting as a gatekeeper, or somebody who's micromanaging me, or the number of plates that I do have to spin. I don't feel I've got any agency or control over these things. So a lack of a sense of agency and ownership rather than just workload itself, and also the sense of not being valued. Now that's really important when it comes to what you might be involved in, say, in church ministries, and leaderships in churches, that if you don't feel like you are actually being able to own and have agency in what you're doing, and if you don't experience being valued in what you are doing, then you are going to be more likely to experience stress or burnout. Now, the same goes for any particular occupation, any particular vocational context. If you feel like I don't have ownership or some sense of agency in what I'm doing, if I don't experience myself as being valued in what I'm doing, then you'll experience stress in your particular workplace, and then you're going to be prone and liable for burnout. So that says a lot then about what we, let's say it another way. That then asks us to think well about how we engage with people in our leadership. Are we giving them a sense of ownership? Are we giving them a sense of agency? Are we valuing them? Now, of course, you're going to have to be asking about the workload that you're asking them to do as well, but that in itself, workload is not the primary cause of stress. Countercultural work, rest and play. Now, I'm not quite, is that large enough for you to be able to read that? Okay. So here's some ideas about what's currently happening in our Western culture, which maybe for younger people here might be more of an issue. This idea called expressive individualism, that for you to become a healthy person, then you need to find ways to be able to express your authentic self based on your subjective experiences. And what you experience as an individual in your subjective self, and having fulfillment in your subjective self and in your expression of that subjective self, that's the primary identifier. That's the primary way to have well-being. Now, the risk with that, it leads to then identity has to be a performance. You have to continually create yourself. You have to continually create an image of yourself. You have to continually present a social media image of yourself. Another risk with that is that we have to have experiences that are meaningful all the time. And so this particular word, eventification, we have to make events out of everything. Unless it's an event, why would you bother? It's a bit dull, really, isn't it? It's a bit ordinary. And so expressive individualism, ID as performance, eventification, plus electronification joins in this incredible combo. And what is happening is that young people are increasingly experiencing stress and anxiety at levels that are puzzling people in the healthcare profession. It's kind of like, why? They've never been more affluent, they've never had more resources, they've never had more recreational opportunities, and they're all stressed and anxious and worn out. And it seems to be this combination of these things is creating this particular phenomena. Expressive individualism as a basis for identity. ID then becomes performance. Everything's got to be an event. And I'm married or attached or I have a very, very close bond to my electronics. And so I do think it's very, very important for us to be asking in terms of dealing with stress, what's the basis for my identity? So stress is not just simply about how much activity you do, it's also an identity issue. Where do you ground your identity? Also, I think for all of us, what is our relationship with our smartphone, with technology and social media, and who and what is controlling us? Now, if you're like my parents, electronification causes stresses for all other different kinds of reasons, apart from dependency on it. They have a dependency on it, but it just drives them absolutely crazy because it's kind of like, how does this work? Oh my goodness. But for others, you need to ask some hard questions about what your relationship with your electronics are. What's controlling you? How long can you really go without looking at that particular phone? So these are some important things I think as Christians we need to be thinking through from a kingdom perspective. In terms of how we identify our personal identity, how we experience life, our relationship with electronics, do we demonstrate anything that's different from the culture around us? Now, there's the idea that we're all discipled by our culture, and that discipling influence is mostly stronger than what you can get in a half-hour sermon on a Sunday morning, or even a leadership thing like this on once a term. We are continually being discipled by our culture. We're living in a cultural stream that we may not even be aware that we're actually swimming in it. And so if we are to provide something countercultural, I would call us back to the idea of Sabbath. And that's the idea that it's Sabbath all the time, every day of the week. Now, in the book of Isaiah, there's 3 songs. The first song is a song of judgment, because Israel has not been the covenant people that God has asked them to be. The second song is a song of comfort, that while they're in exile, that here is the God who will comfort them. And then the third song begins in Isaiah 56, and it's a song of restoration on their return to Jerusalem. And then, just as you think, at last we've been restored, Chapter 58 comes along and God is ticked off with them again. And the things that he's ticked off with them about, many of them actually are about religious activities, and so it looks like they're doing all the right kind of things. Some of those is about some attitudes that they're having towards other people. They're doing things with anger. But the chief complaint is this. There's actually two chief complaints, and these complaints go through to the rest of the song, to the end of the book of Isaiah. One of those is that they have forgotten justice. But the other is that they have forgotten Sabbath. But we're building the temple. We're restoring worship. We're doing all the spiritual things that you want us to do. But you've forgotten Sabbath. And so there's a theme that runs through the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, that Sabbath shapes all of our life. It's not just one day of rest from work, but Sabbath is actually the basis for all work. That we need to learn to rest in God even as we work. That we need to trust in the providence, the sovereignty, the goodness of God, even in our work. That all of our work rests in Sabbath. And that then has a particular rhythm to it, a particular pace to it, so that you are not rushed or always living by the urgent, where busyness doesn't control. It's Sabbath all the time, every day of the week. And so one of the things I try to do, and this has been something which I've developed from about the age of 40, somebody asked me once, where do you enjoy having holidays the most? And my response was, we go as a family annually up to Coral Bay, so Dave's heading there in a few days' time. And I said Coral Bay and also Rottnest. And they said, why? And I actually didn't know why I enjoyed those holidays the most. But my sense of it was that there's no cars involved. You get there and you fall into a particular rhythm that's far more governed by the sun coming up, the sun going down, what's happening with the weather. There's a particular pace that you live at, and getting into that particular rhythm, which is more, has a sense of Sabbath, where there's a kind of a resting in God, a walking with God, a rhythm set by God's creation. And so what I began to do is I tried to kind of come back from my holidays and continue in the same mindset. And initially it would last about 3 days, and then I got busy again. And then it was about 3 weeks, and I got busy again. But I would say that most often I walk, I work, I play, I rest in Sabbath. So that means that I avoid busyness. I'm happy to be full. And if any of you, some of you know me, but if you do know me, you know that I'm not somebody who's lazy. I'm a fairly productive person, but operating in a sense of Sabbath. Happy to be full, but we don't have to be busy all the time. I will refuse. If any of you come up and meet me in the street and said, "Oh, have you been busy?" I'll say no, and I'll do that little thing I said at the beginning. But most often, I'll actually avoid all conversations about busyness. What an unbelievable waste of time. People will have an hour, 2 hour conversations about how busy they are. Well, if you're that busy, you wouldn't be having an hour or 2 hour conversation about how busy you are. So busyness has kind of become a social currency. You compare busyness notes, and then you add status and value according to how busy you are. And I don't think it has much to do with Sabbath at all. We don't have to be busy all the time. Busyness is not a virtue. Busyness is not a talking point. So you should try that. Just go for a week and not have a conversation about busyness. Just see how you go. Now, sometimes that might be a bit awkward. It's kind of like, okay, what else do we then talk about? What else is there to talk about? Annie Dillard, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, said the only thing worth talking about, and a Christian author as well, the only thing worth talking about is the weather. Because it's the only thing we haven't learned how to control yet. So even the small talk about the weather may be more valuable than talking about busyness. Another risk that we have in this particular day and age, and I think it is particularly unique to this day and age, when too much information is not wise. Now, there is information, and there is plenty of information in the world. When you get information and group it together and classify it together, that's knowledge. And there is plenty of knowledge in the world. But that is not the same as wisdom. Now, AI and chatbots and social media do a pretty good job of information and knowledge, but wisdom is a different category. And what's being discovered is that we are trying to pack too much information and knowledge into brains that cannot deal with them. Can you stay abreast of all that is happening in the world and really deal with that adequately without getting overwhelmed or stressed? One of the first ideas spoken in Genesis is do not eat of the free. I'm not quite sure where the rest of that sentence is going to go. Okay. Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't even know where the free. I do sometimes when I'm a bit kind of worn out and stressed. I do spoonerism. So there's sometimes where I'll lop at the said rights instead of stop at the red lights. But I don't know where the free came at all in that. There's not a fruit. Yeah. Fruit. Okay, that's where it came from. Somewhere in there. Yeah. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Fruit, free. There's the connection. Now, for some people, if this was occurring to them while they're having public communication, they'd begin to feel stressed. Oh my goodness, I fluffed that. My goodness, the sky's going to fall. I don't feel stressed about that happening. And you know the primary reason why at the end of the day? Because I'm loved by God. Who I am and what my deepest value is doesn't depend on how well I communicate at this particular point in time. I can fluff my lines and it's going to be okay. Isn't that good? Yeah. Because I'm in the love of God. We'll say a little bit about that in a moment as well. So the particular, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, I don't want to get too kind of tricky theologically here, but there is some kind of argument that wasn't God's intention that humans would never, ever know good and evil, but it's going to be a learning process for you, and it's going to mature over time, and it's going to be done in dependence on God. Otherwise, it's going to overwhelm you. And there's other hints in the rest of the Hebrew scriptures that we were to grow in the knowledge of good and evil in God's timing. But don't take it upon yourselves to try and deal with all that there is to know about good and evil, because it will be overwhelming for you and you will not be able to handle, and you'll lose control of everything. And so we live in a culture at the moment where there's so much information and so much knowledge going around that it's easy for us to be actually overwhelmed. Now, what's important about that is that we need to be secure and ground ourselves in this world. In Psalm 90, it's a psalm of Moses, and on the one hand, Moses complains, God, we've been under your punishment for 40 years, and it is really, really hard. But even if we weren't under your punishment for 40 years, and we just had a good kind of innings of 70, maybe 80 years, life would still be hard. And so we're caught between your judgment, God, and we're caught between your judgment and how life really is, and it's just all hard. Can't we just cut a break somewhere? And so in verse 14, he speaks this: satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love. And when I read that, I was actually up in Coral Bay when I read that, and it just really struck me. Is that something that I actually seek intentionally each morning? Do I kind of hope that I might know it? Or that if I do all my other Christian responsibilities and duties that I might get a taste of it? But do I actually intentionally pursue it? Do I intentionally rest in it? Do I intentionally seek it? Am I intentionally mindful of it? Do you intentionally live in hope daily? Do you intentionally live in God's unfailing love daily? We live in a world where there's a constant background of threat. And so to intentionally and deliberately be mindful of living in the unfailing love of God is something I think is important for us to pursue. Formation, spiritual formation, faith formation, discipleship. Your part of your lead program is wanting to facilitate that and encourage that, and that for you to be able to facilitate that for other people. Formation is not a race. You can't mature as a Christian quickly. It requires space and time. Now, again, I could say a lot about that, but I'll just leave that with you as you think about your discipling, your Christian formation, your spiritual formation, both personally and for that which you're involved in with other people. It requires space and time. So one of the things that I do is I'm a counsellor. If you came and saw me and you experienced me as being in a hurry, look, could you just quickly move through that particular problem because there's somebody else coming in half an hour? That'd be really handy, okay? Are you going to hang around? Okay. And what does that do to the possibility for formation and transformation? It just ruins it. And so whether you're 5 minutes with a person or whether you're an hour with a person or whether you're 2 hours with a person, I'd hope that they have the sense that you've got all the time in the world. One of my favourite books about worship is by Marva Dawn, a theologian who passed away last year. She was at Regent College in Vancouver, but her book was Worship, A Royal Waste of Time. That was the subtitle for it. One of your Christian vocations is to waste time with people. And they should have the kind of sense that you're actually quite happy to waste the time. Even if what you might be doing might be something which is quite meaningful or purposeful. Here are some ideas which also may be helpful for you. Lower functioning part of your brain is where our threat responses and our stress responses come from. And it can be thought of as being the smoke alarm. Upper functioning part of your brain is where your emotional, behavioural regulation, your thinking, your story, your values, your planning occurs. And you can think of that as being the control tower at an airport. It's elevated, it's able to see 3 or 4 different runways, it can coordinate, can regulate, can take off landings, can prioritise. Now, for some of you, you live by your smoke alarms. And they are on all the time. Damn, 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 damn. And then you'll have conversations about how stressed you are and about how busy you are. Okay, and then this may happen to you, is that after a while, some of your friends might get a little bit tired of those particular conversations, and they don't quite know how to kind of move you on. Okay, but you might feel that actually I've been moved on by them, but unfortunately, your smoke alarm still controls the show. Dan, 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 dan. So you walk onto another relationship where you talk about how stressed you are and how busy you are. It's not healthy. It's really important for you to be able to get the control tower in place and operating. Now, what's been shown, some very simple research has been shown that simply the idea of this and people being aware of the idea of this helps people to reduce stress. Oh, am I operating out of my smoke alarm or am I operating out of the control tower? Smoke alarm. Okay, yep, there it is. I need to actually get into the control tower, okay, and be able to regulate things. Now, sometimes we think that we're operating by the control tower, but actually it's still being governed by the smoke alarm. And it typically shows in one of two ways. One way in which the smoke alarm can control the control tower is that you only see one runway. That's it. One runway, boom, it's just stuck. Boom, 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 boom. And you think that the control tower is in charge, but the fact that you're stuck on one runway says no, the smoke alarm's actually in charge. Now, what we know is that our brain can only deal with about 3 or 4 things at once. Anything more than that, some people can do more than that, but they're very rare. It just kind of, whoa, our brain just goes, too difficult. So it's 3 or 4 runways at most. Another way in which the smoke alarm controls the control tower is that instead of seeing 3 or 4 runways, you see 34 runways. Now, I've got to deal with all this, 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 I've got to deal with all this. Now, you think because you can see 34 runways that this control tower is actually in charge, but it's actually being controlled by the smoke alarm. Okay, I need to reduce things down to 3 or 4 things. We know this as well. Whiteboard, visual place, 3, 4 runways that you have to prioritise. You will actually do better than trying to wrestle with all that in your head. You try and do it in your head, and particularly if you're prone to stress, you're going to lose. So just the simple idea of the control tower and the smoke alarm. Here's another idea which can be helpful. Traffic lights can help. When you are in a highly stressed state, an anxiety state, there's a little part of your brain called your amygdala, and it glows red. It takes all the oxygen out of the rest of your brain. The thinking part of your brain switches off, the regulation part of your brain switches off, the awareness of other people part of your brain switches off, and it, bang, red. Now, when you come to a red light in a vehicle, what are you meant to do? Who was that? And how are your demerit points going? So you come to a red light in a car and when your amygdala glows red, it says go full bore. Orange light in a car, slow down, approach with caution. When your amygdala begins to heat up and glows orange, it says go faster. Green light in a car, go. When your amygdala glows green, what does it tell your brain to do? Stop. Chill, relax, recline on the couch. I'll get around to that assignment later. It'll sort itself out. Just perhaps then, okay, I've got another week to go before something's due. And so what we do is we train ourselves, and this is the part where if you came to any of my courses where I lecture and you're a first year student with me, I'll tell you this, okay? You can learn not to study according to what most students study by. What most students study by is, it's not due for another 4 weeks. Plenty of time for coffee and talks about God, because we're at Bible college, aren't we? That's what you do. You know? Oh, a week to go. Oh, another week to go. Now, the orange light might be kicking in, okay? And so you might begin to get a little bit anxious, but that's all right. You'll wait till 2 days beforehand, okay? And then the red light begins to glow. Okay, now I've got to get into gear. Now I've got to get into action. And so you'll finally hand in the assignment at midnight on the day that it's due, simply for the relief of being able to get away from this alarm going dan, 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 dan. Now, most students, and therefore most adults, learn to actually do life that way. Just wait for the green light, chill it out, wait for things to get a little bit more kind of anxious, wait till it gets into the red zone, and away we go. It's just not a terrific way to do life. Okay? Our brain gets wired to it. There's a bit of a buzz attached to it. We all like a little bit of drama. We've got a pass grade anyway. I can pull off the work that needs to be done, but it's just not a terrific way for our brain. And you can actually train your brain to work in the green zone if you link it to reward. It's the only way that our brain actually learns things is by connecting to something which is satisfying and good. Not even valuable, it has to be satisfying and good. So I went to one of my professors when I was 18. I've got a 15-minute attention span. I'm doing an undergraduate course here. I want to be able to get back in those days, the equivalent of HDs in my majors by the time I finish, because I want to do postgraduate studies. And I've got a 15-minute attention span. What do? He said, study in 15-minute blocks. Added a reward to it, and then just over time extend. Now, I'm kind of by disposition, what I describe as a chatty introvert. Okay, so I like talking to people. So at the end of every 15 minutes, I go find somebody to talk to. Okay, or at home, I'd talk to my family, and then over time, just extended it out, followed by a little chat. And then extend it out, followed by a little chat. Yeah, so that's how I went from being that 18-year-old who had a 15-minute attention span to being able to modify some of my own particular behaviours. And then linking that to rewards that you experience satisfaction. And sometimes you've got to tell yourself this: do you know what? That reward didn't give me as much as a buzz as getting that paper in at midnight. That will give you more of a buzz. Okay? The level of satisfaction was lower, but I like that. And what we also know is that the more that you can coach yourself out loud, saying those kind of things, is actually more helpful. Again, you try and do that wrestling match in your head, and you will lose, particularly if you're prone to stress. Last slide. The surprising benefits of faith, hope, and love. Faith. When you trust something that is secure, it generates security. Hope is an antidote to despair and pessimism and powerlessness and feeling overwhelmed by the circumstances of life. And love, when we are secure in love, it is very hard to be stressed. When we are secure in love, it is very hard to be anxious. Not necessarily in an absolute sense, but one of the primary ways to deal with fear is by being secure in love. And when we love, we also are able to take action against the darkness. And being able to take action against the darkness, all those things which can threaten, then reinforces that we don't have to be controlled by the tough and challenging circumstances of life, which there are plenty of. So the surprising benefits of faith, hope, and love. which has to be developed in ways that are genuinely real in your life. Not just some kind of technique, just not some kind of bunch of Bible verses that you just kind of, hopefully if you just kind of memorize those things, it's going to do some kind of work magic in your life. You've got to massage that through the reality of particular situations, challenging moments, intentionally thinking about what does it mean to actually live by faith and hope and love in this scenario. But there are resources available to us in terms of faith and hope and love as part of our relationship with God through Christ by the Spirit that enables us to de-stress. Okay? Now, I'm going to ask you to do this. For about 10 minutes, in your groups, I want you to just have a discussion about the first 4 questions on your piece of paper. Then we're going to, after that, so 10 minutes, okay, discuss with each other, first 4 questions, and then we're going to have about 10 minutes Q&A after that, if you have any particular questions you want to ask. All right, folks. Hopefully, even in that brief discussion, there were some things which were valuable. Perhaps just in beginning to talk about those things just in itself is valuable. But perhaps you might even begin to think about things, on the basis of that, there's some things I might need to stop. Or there's some things I might need to reduce. Or maybe there's some other things I might need to start practicing. One of the things I didn't mention when it comes to the traffic lights is that if you are aware that you are in the red zone in your head, you must stop. When you realise that you are speeding up, you must. But the problem is that once you're in the red zone, it's really hard to stop. And once you're in the orange zone, it's really hard to slow down. So you have to rehearse those things when you are in the green zone. Which, guess what, your brain doesn't want to do it because the green says just lay on the couch and... Because basically our brain only really wants to get really active if there's threat or there's reward. If there's no threat or there's no reward, hey, why do anything? Yeah, I'm quite happy here. But we do know that in the green zone is where you need to rehearse and practice how you're going to deal with those things that can start getting you wound up, and also how you're going to stop when you're actually in the red zone. To try and do it when you're in the red zone is virtually impossible. To try and do it while you're even speeding up is very, very difficult. So taking time to actually practice it in the green zone may seem really kind of clunky, and you might not necessarily have a whole lot of motivation to do it. Another little idea when it comes to things which can create stress, and procrastination can be one of those things, do not wait for motivation to hit you. It will not happen. Okay, you can sit there, come on, and it just doesn't arrive. And so sometimes you see public speakers, what they'll do is when they begin to speak, they'll step into what they're about to say. And so one of the best things to do when it comes to any kind of activity you need to be involved in is step into it. Then you might need to be paying attention, careful attention to what internal rewards you might experience, and be mindful of that, or you may have to construct rewards for that particular action. And so you might have some intrinsic motivation, which you can tap into, but the motivation may be extrinsic initially, and then you've got to be able to kind of then internalise that. But if you wait for the motivation to hit you, and sometimes we pray that way as well, just God, oh God, God, and it's kind of like, and God's going, come move. Just step into what you need to be doing, okay? I'm going to be with you. I know it's scary. I know it's kind of like you haven't done it before. It's unfamiliar to you, but it's going to be okay. Is there any questions that anybody's game enough to kind of ask, or if they would like anything clarified at all? Yes. Do I need to repeat the question for the sake of? Oh, okay.
When you talked about how stress is addictive,
Yeah.
how hard or how long a process, and I guess it's individual, does it take to break that addiction?
Yeah, so generally most of and these, again, it's a very broad generalisation, generally most of any habit breaking and habit formation takes about 12 weeks to 3 months. Now, the good news about that is that it's not 2 years. Okay, the bad news about that is that it's not a week. It's just long enough to be really difficult, but not impossible. What's been also shown, and this has been more in addiction studies, that if you go 2 months and then go back to where you were, you basically have to start over again. It's not just kind of like, oh, just another month. You have to go back and start the process over again. So, and again, what's really important on the way through that is to actually attach it to reward. And what I'd encourage to you is kind of healthy reward, okay? And one of the things that's important when it comes to the idea of reward, if you do something which is new for you or unfamiliar to you, so I'll have students say, I'm no good at doing public speaking. And I'll say, no, you're unfamiliar with doing public speaking. Now, after you've done your presentation to the class, do not do this. Oh, thank goodness that's over. Thank goodness that's finished. Oh, thank goodness I don't have to do that again until next semester, because that will actually reinforce how challenging everything actually is. It's really important to be able to link it to reward. So that the control tower. So when it comes to that bottom part of your brain, you need to go both higher into your control tower, but also lower. I am loved by God and I'm going to be okay. And I did that presentation, and I'm really pleased that I did it. Yeah. Even if you get a pass or a high distinction, that's not the critical issue. That was me. Don't do I hope I don't have to do that again. Any other questions?
I guess, could you give more of an example on the reward system? Like, what would that look like for someone to like instill those? Like, I just need an example, I guess.
Okay, so for me, one of the things I did was I talk to people. Okay, another thing which I do when I do something outside of my comfort zone, which I'm not familiar with, and I haven't done before. One of the ways that, and there's not an intrinsic reward to it, there's not some kind of being aware of kind of like satisfaction in that. There was a particular example where I had to be part of a subcommittee I was on, where this person would give me a fair bit of grief. And I woke up one particular morning quite anxious, and I realised it was connected to this particular meeting in the afternoon, and I didn't want to be there. And I went through a process of kind of, settling, getting back into kind of a more settled kind of state. And as I thought through it, again, the level of threat was exaggerated. In my mind, it was going to be an 8, 9, 10 out of 10 level of threat, and I've got no capacity to be able to deal with it. Thinking it through, it was about a 3 level of threat. Could I go for an hour and a half meeting and, will I particularly enjoy it? No. Is what we're talking about valuable? Yeah. And so for that, even though there's no particularly intrinsic motivation, what I will do then, and again, you've got to just work out what it is for you. And this is not trying to be over spiritual. I'll come to that in a moment. But one of the things I'll do is quite plain. I'll have a nice cup of espresso coffee with 2 blocks of really good dark chocolate and have it slowly. And I will also be thankful to God. Yeah. So a mindfulness about being in the love of God and being thankful to God and God's goodness and grace, linked to also what I consider to be an external, healthy enough reward. Now, you might have your own particular, you might think the espressos and 2 dark blocks of chocolate is kind of like, nah, that wouldn't do it for me, okay? But they're called, the technical word for it, they're called somatic markers, and then they create new somatic markers in our brain, and what happens is the old somatic markers get pushed out, and what we thought before was that only children need pleasurable and satisfying rewards, and as adults we'd just be far, far more mature than that, and as long as it's valuable we'd continue to do it, but it's been shown that it's not true. Yeah. Is that an example of that can kind of get you in the right direction? Yeah, okay. You heading down to Krispy Kremes next, or only one small little one? Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Happy to engage with your questions if you're bold enough.
I'd be interested in any discussion further discussion about the relationship between stress and anxiety, and how neurodiverse people experience more of that.
Oh yeah, my goodness. Yeah.
How that sort of relates to stress and well-being.
Oh my goodness. That's a really important question, and how do I do that any kind of justice in a short period of time? For people who have got neurodiversity, let's go back, okay, a little bit more. All of us are neurodiverse, okay. So let's not kind of say there's one particular category of people that are and the rest of us aren't. We're all a little bit kind of strange and odd in our own particular unique kind of ways, and particularly Rod, okay. So that's how we tend to think, that I'm somehow kind of normal and other people are a little bit, they're the ones that are a bit different, but it doesn't quite work that way. And what we do know is that when it comes to dispositions that we are born with, there's not as many of those as we actually think. It's just my personality is usually an exaggerated idea, but there are some things which we are dispositionally come with, and one of those things is actually proneness to stress and anxiety. And so there are some people who by birth, right from the get-go, are more chilled, okay? And there's other people kind of like, oh, I'm on edge here the whole time, what could be happening next? And they're kind of wired that way. Now, what we do know is that life is challenging for people who are towards that end of it's just difficult. So there is a kind of an alertness and a sensitivity to stimuli, which just can't just easily be turned off. And also that very experience in itself can be tiring, having that kind of switched on almost like all the time. And the kind of, there's many things I could say about it, because there's quite a lot of research done in this particular area over the last 5 to 10 years and that kind of stuff. But one of the ones that can be more helpful is similar to what they've actually done with pain management. And pain management is to not try and fight the pain as much as we have done previously, but to try and actually background it and white noise it. So people can actually live with quite chronic pain if they learn actually how to actually kind of background it and white noise it. And so what's been discovered is that people who may experience pain at a level 8, 9 out of 10, if they can actually white noise that and reduce that down to about a 3 out of 10, they actually can actually live well. And the same thing with anxiety. So basically anxiety says, in one form or another, stress says this is overwhelming or impossible. Anxiety says you're going to die. Okay, so, and that's not an exaggeration. It may be the death of a relationship or a death of a job or maybe actually a physical death, but your brain goes into heightened threat mode, and your body prepares for that particular kind of phenomena. But what's been shown for people who have a disposition towards anxiety, or it's kind of ever kind of present and just there, that if they can reduce it down to about a 3 out of 10 and background it, doesn't go away. Yep, there it is. Yep. With appropriate rest, and that's an important element of it as well, they can live well. But don't, if you're in any kind of pastoral care or any kind of friendship or any kind of relationship, just get over it. Okay? Well, you should have been able to sort that out by now. Or if you just trusted Jesus enough, you wouldn't be in that particular place. Just not helpful. Okay? Some of you may have tinnitus. But living with that kind of that heightened level of anxiety as a disposition, it's like having tinnitus, and it's just the experience of it is challenging, but just the tiredness of the experience of it is challenging. So there's almost like a double effect of it. And if any of you have kind of chronic pain, the pain itself is painful, but the tiredness in experiencing the pain is painful. So it has that kind of double kind of effect. What we do know is that anxiety can also then turbocharge anxiety. So panic attacks are basically anxiety about anxiety. And so it has this kind of turbo charge kind of effect. And you might kind of go, well, that's just unrealistic. They just, my wife just recently got bitten by a snake. And was not a good experience for her at all. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. A couple of weeks ago, because of the snake bite, she was driving a car and she passed out in the car. That wasn't a good experience for her as well. She was then taken down for an MRI scan, and involuntarily she had a panic attack. Well, it's not going to do you any harm. This is what's best for you. Just get over it. You should be, trust Jesus. Okay? She eventually did do the MRI scan, listening to rock and roll music really, really loud in her head. Okay, that got her through with it. So just kind of like what you may think is really logical as a way of just saying, look, just as a way of dealing. This is a broader kind of thing. Try and avoid the word "just" in most of your vocabulary. Well, if you just, and if you just. Or if you if you just trust Jesus, particularly, okay. For a lot of people, it's just not as easy as that. No? So one of the things I talk about is this idea of normalising anxiety. Now, by disposition, I'm not an obviously anxious person, but the idea that any of us are free from anxiety. There's not moments where it can get us, or it can just cause this little ripple that just sits there and just does its work. And one of the things I think is really helpful is just to normalise that. Okay? Yep. We all experience it in one way or another. Some louder than others, some quieter. Yeah, but we all do. And so to come up with kind of cheap or quick answers or simple faith answers, I think we just got to be cautious about that. So that's kind of a response to that question. Yeah. And there's a lot more that can be said about that. Yeah. Time to wind up? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Hope there's been some value in that for you. Okay.
Thank you so much, David. I know for me, there are so many parts of that I can take away into my life in so many different ways. And I hope that you've been encouraged and you can take some of that away. And like David said at the beginning, there is a lot of what we can learn tonight that we can just leave here, or we can take it with us and actually put it into place. So I encourage you to be intentional in that space and put some of this stuff that we've learned together into place. We, I guess as a part of the lead community, want to hear back from you. So if you've got resources or encouragements or things that you can give back to the lead community and we can share, we'd love to hear from you. So the QR code on the back, you can find a link to sign up to our lead emails, which is just a resourcing platform that we can send out things to you, but you can also reply back to us and we can add that into the next month's email and things like that. Or you can just email me or email lead@lifestreamcc.com. We'd love to hear back from you. So please don't let this be a one-way thing. Let's just be a community together and hear back from each other, and we can encourage each other in our leadership journeys. Thanks so much for being here. Our lead emails will let you know what's happening with our lead things coming up in the next few months too. So keep an eye out for that. We'll see you next time. Bye.